Well, Mona, it has been a pleasure for us to have you here at the university, and we would like to take the opportunity also to know a little more about what you've talked about during this week to our students. And it would be important for us to share this information to others. And that's why today we're doing this interview. I would like to start by asking you, how would you define media at this time?
That's a very interesting question, because media right now is going through a huge transition. And the simplest reason is that the traditional sources of news have faced tremendous challenges and competition from new sources of news. For example, if you look at the United States, where I live, most young people today in the US don't get their news anymore from newspapers in the way that their parents did. Mm-hmm. They get their news from the internet. And funnily enough, most young people in the United States get their political news from a comedy show called The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Mm-hmm. So what we used to call, the news, where the whole family sat down at 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. and watched the news, is no longer the main source of news. And so that affects the whole way we look at media. And it really depends on what your definition of media is. If the media's role, for example, is to educate and inform, then there are many things that we can call the media, including new websites, blogs, a new phenomenon, where people go online and create a page that it's called a blog, and tell the world all kinds of things. Social networking sites like Facebook and YouTube and MySpace, and the traditional sources of news. And if the media's role is to, in entertainment, is to entertain you, then do we consider gossip magazines and tabloid shows and all of that also media? So I think my point is, the media is this kind of all-encompassing umbrella term that constantly has to change and evolve. So if you imagine it as an umbrella, the umbrella is getting bigger and bigger, because more people and more things are fighting for space under that umbrella, which is very exciting. It can be very threatening to those traditional sources of media, because they controlled what the media was, especially the corporations that own media. But for the rest of us who believe in a widening of that term, and particularly for those who are behind the blogs and who post their own video clips, for example, on YouTube, it's a very exciting time. So we're living through this period now where all these old-fashioned definitions are changing to make space for more people, which I think is always good.
Of course, and you have mentioned the role of media. How would you define right now the role of media? What is your ideal role of media in what we are living right now, and the changes that we're going through through technology, basically? What would you define will be your ideal for this kind of media? What role would they have to follow?
I think my simplest definition would be that the media should help people in any society to be responsible citizens, and responsible citizens armed with enough information to make them able to be active members of their society and democratically active in their society. And that's obviously a challenge in societies that are not democracies. For example, my country of birth, Egypt, which is why I'm especially excited by, and that's why I want to expand what media means, because particularly when you get into the field of citizen journalism, which basically means an individual who is not the old-fashioned kind of journalist. He or she hasn't been trained in journalism. He or she doesn't have an editor who's there, to correct or to oversee the copy. But what they've done is they've said, I'm a citizen and I want to inform my fellow citizens of things that are happening that perhaps these old-fashioned media outlets are not doing. They're not paying attention to these issues. And in my opinion, that is also a way of arming citizens with information and with news that makes them responsible and active citizens. So even though they can't take part in democratically in the way, say, someone can in the US, what it's doing is it's telling them about things that the state-controlled media is refusing to acknowledge or is ignoring. So I find that very exciting. So I think it's a role that will change. It's almost like a chameleon. It will take on the colors that it needs to take on, depending on the environment. But ultimately, my dream is that the media makes you an active citizen who feels that he or she has a stake in her or his society.
Good. When you talk about the active citizens, they come with a responsibility when they use technology to have that voice that if it wasn't for technology, they could not have. What do you think is the responsibility of each one of these civilians who now are becoming our journalists in the world?
That's a very good question, because those citizen journalists, this kind of new movement of individuals who kind of demand the right to inform everybody about things, because this is very new. You don't have things like editors who in the past used to make sure that all this information is correct. You don't have fact checkers that will call someone up and say, did you really say this to our journalist, to make sure that it's all correct. So it is a tremendous sense of responsibility and power. But I would argue also that I'm against any kind of regulation of this new kind of power, because it's very dangerous to talk about regulation, because what that eventually leads you to censorship, and I'm against censorship. So it's very dangerous, it's very challenging, and unfortunately it will be abused. There are people today who do abuse this very new medium and this kind of power. But my hope is that the more people express themselves using these new channels, the more it will become a kind of self-policing environment where somebody will abuse this power, but somebody else will come out and say, hey, you can't do that. For example, one of the students, after I gave a lecture on the power of blogs, mentioned that in her country, Myanmar, some people had posted on their blogs pictures of anti-government demonstrators, and that then endangered their life because the security forces could identify them and find them and arrest them. So, this is an immediate threat to these people's well-being. And of course I'm against that, but my hope is that the blogging community in Myanmar, for example, will come together and say, this is really dangerous, this is irresponsible, let's not do that anymore, and recognize the consequences. I'm much more in favor of that than having some kind of authority come in and say, these are the rules we're going to put in, because A, who will decide who that authority will be, and B, how far do you draw the line before you enter into this kind of very grey area of censorship. So I'm hoping, as more young people turn to the internet and blogging in this very exciting new field, that more of them will recognize that this is a power that comes with responsibility, but that they will do it from within rather than have someone come from outside.